but we are on time, perfectly on time. Hello, everybody. I am Estela Ortega, co-curator, together with Patti Núñez and RCR Architects of the Catalonia in Venice exhibition RCR Dream and Nature at the Biennale de Arquitectura, in the context of the Eventi Collaterali organized by Institut Ramon Llull. I'd first like to welcome you to this next session of new format, Dream and Nature, that has been possible thanks to the support of COAC. In this occasion, we are pleased and honored to present around the subject entitled Architecture Criticism, the renowned Glenn Murcutt, Ioanni Pallasmaa, and Mr. William J.R. Curtis. Just a brief about each one of them. Glenn Murcutt is an Australian architect, as you know, critic and teacher, founding president of the Australian Architecture Association. He won the Alvar Aalto Medal in the '92 and the Pritzker Prize in 2002. He has also been president of the Pritzker jury and given the Pritzker Prize to RCR. He has designed some of the most innovative and environmentally sensitive buildings in Australia. Its motto, "Touch the Earth Lightly," is internationally recognized by an architecture sensitive to the surrounding landscape. Ioanni Pallasmaa, as architect, teacher, essayist, historian, and architecture critic. He has been a juror of the Pritzker Prize, director of the Finnish Museum of Architecture, and was the director of the Helsinki School of Architecture. Author of numerous books on philosophy, psychology, theory of architecture and art. Undoubtedly, his most translated work has been The Eyes of the Skin, in which he addresses the importance of the sense of touch in our perceptual experience of space and in our way of understanding the world. William J.R. Curtis is a historian and critic of architecture, author of many articles and books such as Le Corbusier Idea Reform, but especially Modern Architecture since 1900, considered one of the most important books in contemporary history of architecture. He studied in the US, in London and Harvard, and has taught history and theory of architecture in various countries, such as US, Mexico, or Australia. He also cultivates abstract painting and photography, with which he portrays landscape and the harmonious order of things. Though it's hard to say something that you wouldn't know about these magnificent figures and their relation with architecture, we thought that because of their knowledge, but also because of their affinity with RCR, would make this occasion even more special to have them all together here in Venice. There is a shared sensibility among all of them, a common understanding of the elements that reveal a sense of architecture that goes beyond the more perceptible, those elements that connect to the deepest part of us, in the sense of mystery, spirit, and existence, giving us ways to see and understand the complexity of the world through architecture and its relation with life and context in a crystalline and essential manner. With their huge work, including articles, essays, teaching, lectures, buildings, and artistic works, we have been able to discover how to scope our look for a better understanding of architecture. So as Friedrich Nietzsche quoted, the dancer has his ear in its toes. So thank you, masters, for this, and welcome. And please let me end my speech and give you the words with another quote, this from Eleanor Roosevelt, that defines the aim of the project RCM, Dream and Nature, and it goes like, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." So welcome. I'd like to just suggest you some topics about three items, and then I think that it will be nice that you can just go on by yourselves. Okay, so the first one should be like, we are in Venice, surrounded by architecture and history, and especially these Biennale days confronting the new values to the old ones. But which are for you the values of space in architecture? That should be my first question.
Okay, all right. So we decided I would be the first. So. And I would say, first of all, thank you to the organizer, and that the nature of our relationship to the work of RCR is different in each case, but we're all in the position of experiencing the work, reflecting on its significance, and in some manner or another recognizing that through text, through judgment, or whatever. We're in the world of evaluation of the work. And of course, space is one of the central questions in this Biennale, apparently, but also in the work of Aranda Pigem Velalta. It so happens, just before walking over here, we spent half an hour in Sfera Fenn's Nordic Pavilion, which is a consummate demonstration of the power of the void, l'impacto del vacío, something evocative, present but absent, and something which is energized by light and shade. And there we are already in the world of RCR, because that's the world that they investigate as the container and the contained. And I believe that Venice, of course, is part of that, but I hope in the course of our discussion we will move sideways to Mies van der Rohe, to Japan, and to the many other things that have informed their work, which is so anchored in its place and yet reaches out to universal questions in architecture. So,
well, in my view, space is, of course, fundamental not only for our physical existence but our mental existence. And in the past 20 or 30 years I have increasingly become interested in what architecture is in the mental end of going from the material object to experience and then memory and imagination. And in today's world, I think architects at general tend to be too interested in objects, in the material end of that scale, and even more so on the visual implications of that physical world. I have become increasingly convinced myself through my roughly 50 years of rather intense studies, both as an architect and writer, that vision is not the most important sense in our architectural experience. The most important sense is our existential sense. We confront space, we confront the city, we confront a building in the same way that we confront a person. And it is this confrontation which is the real architectural experience, when we fully internalize what is around us. And very often what is around us is only partially visual, and even in those cases the visual impression is secondary. So what has impressed me in the work of RCR is the skill to create meaningful spaces. I must say, first, when I saw the buildings published in journals, I was felt a bit alienated and confused. But then when I had a chance to spend 3 days in Olot and confront the buildings in the real existential dimension, I was very, very impressed. And I have identified the work of RCR as one of the key works of architecture in our time, which really has an anchor in our lived reality instead of being just fabrication, fantasy, which so much of today's architecture is. And unfortunately also the new media in architecture, the technologized media, both physical and electronic, mainly serve the purposes of architecture turning into fantasy. In my view, architecture needs to reinforce our understanding of reality, because architecture supports life, and that is grounded on reality, not dream.
Well, you know, space requires so many other things with it. For example, light, sound, prospect, refuge. These are all components of space. And I learnt the importance of unity of materials. Living in the Greek islands, for example, for 6 months, to know that there is a material there that's lime. When you slake that lime, it becomes a disinfectant. It becomes a waterproof agent. It becomes a light reflector. It becomes a heat reflector. It is a most marvelous waterproofing agent. One material taking all these elements. And so it is with RCR, taking metal as a material and see how far you can push it, I think is extraordinary. But you have to learn how to open it, to open that space to the landscape. And that's one of the wonderful things, looking at their work. And as I was chair of the Pritzker jury when we gave this prize to RCR, one of the significant issues was the ability to take this material, which is quite a hard material, but it becomes a frame to the landscape. And to be able to look through the frame and be able to pick a particular tree or a particular element was so wonderful to visit it. To be able to look at the filtering of almost curtains coming down, and the light that moves through that. And as these curtains come down and move, the spaces change and the space releases into the landscape. And on one face, you'll get the high level of light, and on the inner face, a lower level, but when it turned out a little bit, the light hits the edge and comes in. It was an extraordinary experience to actually go and visit the work. And the other thing is, in working in a particular region, the region in Catalonia and the town of Olot, it means that the architects get to know their place. And place making is extremely important, to understand the typology, the morphology, the materiality, the textures, the colors, the scale. These are things that are extremely important. And you see the work has responded to this in a very, very modern way. And what they show is that modern architecture is not dead, but modern architecture has the potential of being open-ended. And it's their light, it's their spaces, it's their understanding of materiality, their understanding of construction. These are the things that bring to life the place for humans.
Carry on. This panegyric to RCR. Agreed. Let's say, discovery, if I can put it that way, of RCR goes back to the very late 90s. Was a collective copy of El Croquis, which I was very involved with for a long time. And it was Obra Reciente in España. It was the little pavilion in the entry to La Garrocha. It was a tiny building with 2 angles compressed. I said, aha. This is a germ. This is a seed. This work is very modest, but in there's something coming into being. And then a little bit later, it was seeing the pavilion by the river, the bathing pavilion, also in publication. And then in 2003, Gustavo Gilli decided to do a monograph, and I was contacted, and I said, you know, I'm not involved in vanity publishing at all, ever. I'm not interested. People, believe me, in these biennales that come up, oh, there's a book on my work. I'd like you to write the introduction. I said, I don't care what you'd like. It's what the work says or doesn't say. I'm not interested in the personalities. It's the work. Does the work speak? So I went discreetly first, looked at some of the works around a lot, and I said, okay, vale. And then we met in the Les Cols, you know, and there was immediate connection. First of all, the building, but as it happens, my paintings, which are called mental landscapes, I gave you a catalog and said, hey, bueno, es un mundo proximamente, you know, it's close enough. So there are things of, to do with the direct communication of architecture. And so what happens when the aura of a work, it's partly physical, but it's partly some other dimension that operates when a work touches you. And of course it unfolds over time. And as both Ioanni and Glenn have said, there's a strong materiality. But there's also immateriality. There's some other dimension operating. There's invisible capas, layers that you move through. The immediate impression going into Les Cols of the steel plates on the floor, which are in a perspective, which creates ambiguity, with little punch marks which touch your feet. And then you move towards it and you glimpse the darkness of a kind of metal bamboo, and you move sideways. It's a promenade architecturale, series of movements. And I said, well, Kyoto. They said, yeah, see. Daitokuji, Koto Inn, where, of course, it's stonework that works on your feet, that guides you through. So all of the senses are operating in their work. And let me say, there's also the celebration of cuisine as a high art, cocina. The love of the enjoyment of refined cooking. And the client, Fina, of El Corte, has been a kind of Medici patron for them with the pavilions and then the extraordinary plastic tent for weddings and receptions. And that, when I first saw it, a later visit, because you know, we did that book in 2004, but then other things happened. The little book I did with them on Fundación Bunker on Belloc, which is the underground winery, which is an amazing example of what Ioanni is talking about, where you're denied sight, and you move into smell, breeze, the noise of gravel, the sensations of the hand, and so forth. But coming to the pavilion, I was astounded by it for the inventiveness, using a crude agricultural plastic, but equally the fact that you could put 3 people in it or 300 people in it, that it was a frame for human activity and also for growth, the plants moving through it, and so forth. So on so many levels, this is a work of extreme sophistication. We risk using the word nature today. Nature has become a catch-all. Everything from green salad on skyscrapers in Singapore to, you know, copies of nature. This is more like a Japanese understanding of nature, where you use abstraction to create distance and then refocus. You frame. You use artificiality, like in the tea house, in order to frame and find the spirit behind nature. And I think their absorption of that quality from the Zen gardens in their major trip in the 90s, and for their understanding of Ando, when Ando is at his best, which is, say, the water temple, is profoundly important in understanding how they regard these things, including the use of water. Water is one of your materials. Water, air, light, shadow, gravel, but used in a way that heightens the sense of things. And movement through, and as was said very well, the view out, the feeling of pulling the horizon in, all those are relationships which work on our consciousness, so that the notion of space there is highly complex. It's not just inside nor just outside. It's a constant registering of where you are. And what in our many, many discussions, and we've had so many wonderful discussions, Carme said at one point, es una arquitectura de bordes. It is an architecture of margins and limits. And that when they read a site, for example, Belloc, which is inland from Palamos, there's a long path. Sí, gracias. Estupendo. And they map, when they do those wonderful drawings, they're mapping. They're mapping inside and outside. They're mapping the pressures in the site. Every site is a palimpsest. It's not just nature. It's also the fragments, they're often working in a highly fragmented historical or even post-industrial landscape. So the insertion is a cut which tries to pull all that together and re-link you to the larger nature. It's a technique of cutting, actually. Reminds me of Richard Serra in that respect. So the naturalezza is highly complex, the notion. It's not some easy idea, nature with a big N. It's a highly sophisticated conception where growth is important. The way they conceptualized a winery as something where the roots go down and the branches go up, and there's a filtration of the water. Without going into simple metaphor, they nonetheless embody the very notion of a vineyard and of growing and of our relation to the grape in a ritual, and you go into this tasting chamber that could be, in Pompeii in the 3rd century BC, except it's done with steel and rubble. So those are some of the thoughts I have, but let's pass it back. And maybe Australia is going to guide us towards... Okay, please have it.
You want to interview?
No, I'm only just to go ahead, but I would just, I know, but to highlight that as long as I was asking you about your values of architectural space, and you were referring directly to the works of RCR and remarking it by experience it, so it has a lot to do, because you three were just referring to it, but it has a lot of sense when you do experience it, so for real, no? I think that's very much about RCR, the most strong value of RCR architecture. So, to go ahead, I was just wanting to ask you about, coinciding with the proximity of the 40 years of the Pritzker Prize, that will be reflected, or maybe should be reflected. There was this very first book that was the Pritzker Architecture Prize, the first 20 years that William was an author of it. And according to the different and each particular relation that you three have, and with also RCR with this prize, what do you think about the value and meaning of this recognition and its influence in the career of the architects?
Okay. It well and truly is. One has to be very careful receiving a Pritzker Prize. I was raised in a family where it was very important to do ordinary things extraordinarily well, in Thoreau's words. My father added to that, and be able to go to the beach where nobody knows who you are. The issue of privacy is extremely important. And one of the great problems of receiving a Pritzker Prize is that unless you can handle it, again in a father's quote, with kid gloves and be very cautious about it, you can lose the thread completely. And the really important thing that we noticed in RCR was the potential to also remain real architects. There are members of the small club of the Pritzker Prize that were very nice people, and that all changed. And it's very hard to talk to some of those people. And I have to warn anybody who wins a Pritzker Prize, don't lose your values, remain human, continue understanding the senses, extremely important, keep the modesty to be able to see people, ordinary people in the street, enjoy ordinary conversation, be an ordinary person. As Thoreau said, to do ordinary things extraordinarily well. That ordinariness is extremely important. Today, we see a plethora, and none of us have spoken this four-letter word to this point, form. And form has become a discipline in itself. It is a disaster, in my view. When you start with form, you're already screaming at the environment around you. Unless the building comes out of the roots of architecture, that is history, understanding the typology of the regions, understanding the hydrology, the geology, the whole area of water movement, how soil sponsors particular plants, sponsors particular trees, the depth of that earth will sponsor the size of the tree, the water table will sponsor the rate of growth. These are all real things. And unless we recognize that architecture grows slowly, like trees grow slowly, and all living things grow slowly, to think you can design something overnight, and if you're not anxious about the next process or the next design, you're in great troubles. Jose Cadieux, I met in 1973. I was almost crippled with anxiety about design. And he said to me, Glenn, I feel very good speaking with you. And I must tell you, with every new project, I am very nervous. And I've realized that he released me. And unless, as an architect, you're not nervous about what the program is ahead and how you might end up with this project and the actual building itself and how it develops from the whole planning strategy and section. And section shows you about light, it shows you about ventilation, it shows you about movement, it shows you about scale. So many people are frightened of section. It's so important. And of course, plan is a section as well. But I refer to section as being probably one of the most important elements for an architect to investigate in architecture. I think I'll put you on. I'll keep going.
Yes, during the tens of years that I have traveled around the world and made friends among the architects, I have witnessed a number of cases when reputation and fame has spoiled a good architect. And I always then remember that old Chinese proverb, curse that you throw on a person who you don't like, let him become famous. That's truly a threat, because success makes you believe you've already made it. And as Glenn was saying, in creative work, every task is the new one. And it's always the same uncertainty from the very beginning. About 15 years ago, I had a chance, 20 years ago, to have a dinner with the great Basque sculptor Eduardo Chida, who was a real thinker. He made a book with Heidegger, for instance. During the dinner, he said, I have never had any use for what I have done earlier when I start a new piece. I was so struck by the humility and insecurity in one of the greatest artists of last century. But it is this perpetual uncertainty that one needs to maintain, and as Glenn was saying also, to maintain one's solitude. Success easily makes anyone a public person and changes your character entirely. I would just like to say something about one aspect that I have found so important in the work of RCR, and that is the nature of abstraction. Abstraction is nowadays more often understood as mere stylistic reduction or subtraction. No, abstraction in art is a completely opposite process. It's condensation. It's putting more and more content and pressure into the simple thing, and the life in their work, as in all great works of architecture and art at large is exactly because of the condensation, that they are endless generators of association and emotion and feeling. So I would wish that teachers in architecture and art schools would be a bit more wise not to teach abstraction as a process of mere optical simplification.
So, concerning the Pritzker Prize, I think that one of the difficulties with the way that it's been framed is to globally recognize the oeuvre of an architect or of architects. Of course, every architect has high moments and much less high moments. And it always seemed to me risky to suddenly imagine that you move into a space beyond criticism, beyond inequality, etc. And in fact, several years ago, I wrote a piece in the Architectural Review that was called Grade Inflation. You know, like in American colleges, everybody gets A- or A. And I took the particular example of the Toyo Ito selection. And Lord Palumbo had made, absolutely astonishing claims for Ito about his universality and this and that. And at that very moment, I happened to be visiting one of the projects of RCR in the Plaza de Europa on the way to the airport, their black building. And opposite were two astonishingly mediocre skyscrapers that looked as if they'd caught a virus or even a cancer, both designed by Toyo Ito. And then an absolute caricature of Casa Milà in the center of town. So I wrote a piece saying, what's going on? This is absurd. So what it would be much better is to say X gets A- for this building, or B, and D for this. And I made a few examples. Moneo, I said maybe B- for Romano. Seville Airport, D-, a disaster. Renzo Piano, Baila, B+, A-. But for what he did to Ranchamp, he murdered Ranchamp. Please return the prize. So I'm just, we're talking about a power structure as well. Whatever the Pritzker thinks it's doing, it gets absorbed into other power structures. In the boom economy years, developers used the fact that X or Y was a Pritzker to sell a project, a skyscraper or whatever it was. So these are some of the sort of difficulties that you can run into. Concerning the psychology of the winners, those who were very vain beforehand become even more so, and those who are not, I don't think they get disturbed. I think these guys got their feet on the ground. Personally, as a historian and as a critic, when I function as a critic, I'm not interested in the here and now. I'm interested in the values which last. And when it comes down to it, I also said, imagine if Le Corbusier, Kahn, and Aalto were around. They get the prize. Everybody else drops 3 grades. So let's have a bit of perspective on this whole business of evaluation. That said, Pritzker's obviously done a lot to promote thinking around architecture. We're even doing it now, and I think that's okay. But there's some risks in this operation. When it comes to quality, personally, as a critic, I'm interested in individual works. Some of their works are really good and some are less so, if I may say so. And even in the conflicts within a particular work. Say, Soulages, Rodez, which is very close to where I live, is a remarkable work, a piece of sighting. It's, by the way, Chillida had a completely organized stylistic agenda all the time. He had a language, whatever he says about anxiety. He had a crystallized style. And all good artists have a style. But you have to break with it all the time. But RCR have strategies, they have elements, they have types, and they produced that parallel solution in the house much earlier. It comes also from Impiva of Ferrater, and they are out of a tradition, which is Spanish modern architecture. And that in turn has been absorbing mise and things over the years. So they have a tremendously deep culture of architecture. Not only that, that culture of architecture, particularly in its Catalan dimension, has often integrated architecture and landscape. This is Gaudí, it's Coderch, it's Enric Miralles and Comipinos, the cemetery. It's a subterranean tradition that goes on. And that's all behind your work, too. So I'm with Ioannis when he says it's about distillation, but it's also about having a language that can distill, that can distill each time and come up with a new solution. But for example, with the building in Rodez is brilliantly sited in a fractured urban situation, the cathedral over here, the new town there, the view to the mountains here, a deep thick there. But that geometry in other places produces some very tight and difficult spaces. It's normal. All architecture is payoff. So my job as a critic is not to march in and say, oh, all of this is marvelous. Still less isms. One of the biggest problems I have with writers like Frampton, for example, he goes around inventing isms and then looking for the personnel. Let's plug this in. I mean, when he takes the Church of Balsford by Utzon and tries to turn it into critical regionalism, we're in trouble. You know, it's absurd. So isms, no thank you. The art of criticism is a bizarre to and fro between particularity, generalization, and for the critic themselves to have a sense of value, a sense of history. And so when I went to formulate texts about RCR, all of that comes into play, including my knowledge of the background of Spanish architecture, of De la Sota, of Coderch, etc. There's an extraordinary continuity in Spanish/Catalan architecture. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that, especially in the rhetoric of instantaneity, of neo-avant-gardism, or even of curators like yesterday who are effectively articulating an anti-architectural position. Did you notice? Okay, I did. Muy curioso. So it's very important to come down to these very solid foundations out of which people come. Every artist creates their own tradition. It was T.S. Eliot who said it. They built their own tradition. They built their own tradition by going out into the world, by ignoring declining Barcelona architecture. It was in a manneristic decline in the 90s, just when everybody was romanticizing it. And they said, no, we go outside. So they went to the heart of the matter. They went to Louis Kahn. They went to Mies, Farnsworth, but not the Mies of stylization, the Mies of metaphysics and of framing of nature, the experience. They went to Japan. They absorbed ancient Japan and modern Japan, and they continued to be nourished by Japan. It was so profoundly moving that they had their presentation in Japan, because it's their home. Olot is their home, but so is Japan, their sensibility. It was wonderful with all these earlier Pritzkers there, Maki and company. Maybe not Ando, but Ando is one of your teachers. He was there. Yeah, Ando is one of your teachers, but not Neo-Ando. And this is the point for me as a historian. The dynamics of a modern tradition are not about formulae. They are about extension. I wrote a piece just in the last Architectural Review countering Rafael Moneo, who was, it's all over for modern architecture. I said, hey, hombre, por favor. I mean, look at the recent Pritzkers, look at Doshi and his generation, look at you and yours. There's a long avenue ahead, and it's about reactivating basic ideas into new configurations, transformation, and invention. In that sense, I'm very optimistic about the capacity of these basic seminal works to generate inspiration forward. You go back to go forward. That's the end of my sermon, okay?
If I may just make a couple of comments, because having been on the Pritzker jury for just on 9 years, and Juhani joined us, I joined Juhani on the Pritzker. He was there for 6 years. Yes, you're correct. We do look internationally for work, but since I have been chair, which is the last 2 years, you might note that the two architects that we have honoured are not people that are working all over the globe. They are people working in a specific region, in their own nation, within their peoples, and particularly in Doshi, working from the very poor through to university buildings. And I learned from Doshi, for example, that he's structuring this new school of architecture in Ahmedabad. He did not draw a cent salary through the whole time he taught there. I think it was 30, 40, 50 years, something like that. The integrity of the man was phenomenal. And finally, to say that we're talking about winners of the Pritzker, always remember that if the work from the practice has been recognized as fine work, that work makes every subsequent work vulnerable. And I think that's really important. You're at great risk the whole time.
Let me just add one more dimension to the discussion which started with space. We usually tend to think, and maybe not us, but even some theorists, that architecture is the art form of space. Every art form is that of space, and the entire life takes place with and within space. The aspect that is most neglected in the modern age, and particularly today, is the dimension of time. Time as a cultural continuum that is almost entirely lost, and works become increasingly flat. They might be ingenious and exciting on some graphic retinal level, but there is no convincing understanding of a continuum. But as human beings, we want to live in continua. We don't want to live in a time that has no root in the past or has no hope in the future. That is why increasing numbers of people around the world want to travel and come to places like Venice, to feel the soothing, comforting power of time and presence and layering of traces of life. In my view, the work of RCR has also succeeded in communicating or mediating an experience of cultural continuum. Both gentlemen spoke about that, they're being rooted in place, but one aspect of being rooted in place is to be rooted in time, in the continuum of time, which somehow mediates between the past and the future. This is fundamentally a mental necessity for human beings, which was, I must say, misunderstood by the early theorists of modern architecture, particularly Siegfried Gideon, who directly and without criticality accepted the Einsteinian space-time continuum. Yes, in science and physics, space-time is appropriate, but in the reality of lived life and art, time has another meaning. It's not that kind of emblem that is mixed with another emblem of space. It has a mental autonomy itself.
To go on with that, I think the water is a very important instrument that they use to evoke that.
Joseph Brodsky, on his super fine book on Venice, says equates water and time. Water, time, and God.
Okay. So, I mean, for example, the crematorium building in Belgium is a work which, it's a wetlands. It's released that, it's molded, it's done things with it. But it's also about the mental disengagement from the other world as you move towards it. Programmatically, it has a lot to do with Asplund, but without looking like Asplund. And you go in, and then the event takes place, and people come out, and there's a sense of calm of the horizon with the water, which is often raised slightly, which puts you in a very interesting relation to the water surface, that it's slightly raised. So I think that the use of the ground and articulation of the platform, of half underground, and of things floating. Flotation is a very important part of their work. Gravity and anti-gravity. So you're looking at heavy steel, but you don't feel it. It feels something else is going on. And of course, that changes as you move through. So there's a kind of pressure that takes place. But there is a search for this, whatever you want to call it, a revelation, a moment of imagination being released. But the techniques used are ones of close and far ambiguity. Ambiguity is a very important part of that perception, as it is with Chillida, Comb of the Winds, the way that works. And this creates an inner vibration, if you like. And Calme, in an interview, which was actually in that croquis, a very good interview, was talking about this transcendent quality of the void. The void, la vacío, como un aspecto del transcendental in arquitectura, no? So, which is Japan again, is the feeling of emptiness, as emptiness that you fill by your engagement, your psychic engagement with the place as you move through it. And I think the tasting room underneath the ground is just like that, extraordinary. This room with the little gashes of shadow. There's several of their spaces that have that. But, you know, they're also working with restaurants, with schools. You don't have to play a hymn every time you're designing a school or a library. There's different modalities in architecture. And the other thing that fascinates me about them is that they have a binary system. 0, 1, 1, 0, through steel. And by just varying the spaces, it changes completely the notion of what's the figure and what's the ground. You know, what's the positive, what's the negative. And this they've been doing from the very beginning. When you're in this wonderful athletics field, which is a recovery of a broken landscape, it's where people go running, where children go, where everybody, and yet it's something about it is ancient Greece, you know, those seats. There's classicism there too, but very sotto voce. And then the changing rooms and everything with steel bands organized so that they're in tremendous tension. And it's a kind of rustication in a way. So I'm fascinated that using such a quote-unquote limited means, they can generate so many complex situations of experience, of structure, of organization, and of emotion, and especially with the pressure of pebbles behind or water or other things. So it's a very, very, you could say, restricted language, except it really isn't, because it's a language of relations, not of objects. It's in that world of relations that the architecture lives and comes alive.
And the materials chosen also have life. And this is one of the things that's so lacking in a lot of architecture, where everything is finished and is expected to be the same in 25 years' time. The material has a patina, and it gives age and time just in itself. And that's very important, I think, that many materials simply don't do that. And William, I've got to say, I'm so thankful that we chose these people for the Pritzker. Yeah. Well, I'd have been in terrible trouble today otherwise.
Okay, hearing you, there is a lot that sounds in my mind, that you are kind of talking very much about the importance of the roots and the sense of belonging, and also about time. I was remembering when you were starting talking on Chillida, that there was someone who just explained me sometime that at some point of his career, he kind of decided to start drawing with, forced him to start drawing, learn to draw with the left hand, because if not, he was like too mechanical and was not learning. So there's about time, thinking, belonging, and some roots, no, in this sense, the project of La Villa of RCR, it has a lot of coherence with everything that you are saying, because it's kind of in this time of our life and our next steps, we want to still on focusing even with more strength of all the values that we have been developing since that time. So this is very respectful, and we are.
Can I say something else about steel? I think what Glenn says is very important, but there's also an ambiguity of material. I mean, the floors, for example, in the restaurant, you think you're stepping on stone, but you're actually stepping on steel that looks like stone. And those things are quite important too. When you put your foot on something, you realize it's not what you thought it was. But the steel, for example, in the Corten steel in Rodez, this is one of the most geological cities in France. It's so dense with all the deposits of the Massif Central. And in fact, in one of their projects, they wanted to have a selection of stones marching towards but the municipality ignored it. So you have this sort of volcanic landscape in the distance. But the Corten steel takes on the quality of stone, especially in that context. And yet you look at it, it's handled with such precision. It's nothing but steel. There's something about these multiple identities. And I think that Chillida is an important, again, one of these figures that's in the collective unconscious of several generations, but so is Oteiza. Oteiza is very important to them. Oteiza, who work with the void, but work with steel in order to achieve the void. Beautiful work, and it's there somewhere and somewhere. And, you know, their generation, which I know most of their work, have published much of it and very interested in the directions they take, but nearly all of them have this deep indebtedness to that tradition of modern sculpture in Spain. I mean, for example, Nieto Sobajano took it one way, rather literal actually, et cetera, et cetera. So this needs saying that there are common areas of research in a generation, whatever they think, however different they think they are, and because there are common problems. And one of the problems of this generation has been to inherit a modern tradition and not allow it to become an easy minimalism, which it did. And in the 90s, from one of the biennales, I wrote a piece on the biennale, The Crisis of Normality. It was getting too easy. I said, I can design a Spanish building for you. There's 7 moves, boom, 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 boom. It was going like that. They broke with that. They also, of course, broke with, you know, the excesses of computer-generated design, etc. Now, I want to bring it back to the computer rapidly because there's a danger of oversimplifying everything. They, in the early stages of projects, as you know, use brush drawings, intuition, and so on. But the computer is extremely important in their visualizations and presentation to the rest of the world. They've developed an amazing technique of veils, of images, which are part of the sensibility. It's a highly inventive use of the computer. It's really stupid to make an opposition. Use the tools at the right moment and the right stage in a design process is what I would say. Anyway.
Well, you know, just to add here, I would agree with you, but I believe they always begin their work with drawings. Yes, and that is, I find it so important also, not only on the level of drawing and their artistic qualities, but the artistic, poetic thinking that is implied in architecture, which is often missing in today's architectural work. It doesn't have the echo of history of painting or history of architecture. It's just become architecture in a very dead, formalistic manner. And whereas you mentioned, or either one of you two mentioned Serra, of course, through that materiality, Serra comes to mind, but Serra also in terms of his way of abstracting not only visual phenomena, but how you approach and how you enter and how you are inside a piece. That's also important.
No, absolutely. And Japan is there too. Serra became Serra after discovering the movement through the gardens. you know, that experience on the relation of the close and the far, the body in relation to planes, platforms, and levels. And the sketches you describe are part of what you also describe as distillation of thinking through the hand, through the brush, through the release. And they're somewhere between mapping the place and generating an idea. And there are many of them, as they sort of search for the central intuition of a project. You can't call it an idea. It's not just an idea.
And it's important that to identify research or the study and then creation. I mean,
Yes,
they
yes.
are the same thing, whereas so often in schools, they are described as two separate processes.
No, it's crazy. Well, anyway, as you know, I'm working with this project with the Ljubljana and Zagreb students based on RAB, which is all about the importance of hand drawing and of absorption and description and getting to the underlying spirit of the work. If you can do that, you can reverse it and create the spirit of the work. The lack of understanding in schools of architecture of the importance of the drawing as something that creates a central conception of something, and the ability to look at something and get to the core of it through a few lines. And they have this interest in just a few lines or blobs or washes to create this sense of the aura of a work, or even the aura of a place, the spirit, the atmosphere of a place. Once I was driving with Raphael, who's falling asleep, it's hot, and we were driving towards the Costa Brava, which, by the way, is a very important part of my adolescence. And my first job was working in a botanical garden on the Costa Brava. Okay, fine. And we're driving, and he said, "You see those árboles aquí?" And there was a little colline, a little hill with some trees. And he was reacting immediately to that configuration. He said, "Imagine if you put this here and this here." It was seeing something the way I do as a photographer. You suddenly find a vibration in the place, and you move on it, and you move on that vibration. I remember this discussion. He said, "These árboles aquí, there's something special here, an atmosphere." Zoom. Okay.
No, I think that just to, you want to end with something, but it's not a coincidence. I think that you are referring to artists that every one of them has a strong relation with the place where they work and they belong, because Oteiza and Chillida and RCR, their strong relation with nature and their big and stronger nature of northern Spain, País Vasco, and then they with Garrocha. I think it has a lot to do with this sense of developing this way of working, right? Then just the third and last question would be, as long as we are in Venice, in the 16th edition of the Biennale, International Biennale de Architecture, that, as you know, it's considered one of the most relevant events of architecture around the world. But what do you think about these biennales and its supposed role of being the thermometer of the health in architecture or something? What about that?
Oh, I'm being thrown in. Okay. I don't take biennales very seriously. They are fun. They're ridiculous. There's always a slogan, you know, shared ground, free space, this, that, the other. And then people go and do what they like, you know. It doesn't have much relation to that, and it doesn't matter. What matters is that somewhere in there, you suddenly find something fantastic. You know, there's a lot of nonsense and there's a big problem about how you present architecture. And so many of these things are really bad installation art, frankly. Gadgets, stupidity of various kinds. And then suddenly you find somebody who really knows how to put together a presentation. I was particularly struck in the palace buildings by Raoul Malhotra's presentation with the Elephant House, the projects in India, the very sophisticated use of the gauze the creation of a courtyard, and then real information about the projects. And I thought, haha, this is really, I would give him the Golden Elephant Prize for that. No question. But the point is, you always find something surprising and interesting. Does it have anything to do with the theme? Not necessarily. I mean, I have to say, I think that the curators this year are extremely thoughtful architects who've done some very fine work, which I truly respect. And then you go into the English pavilion, and they're Irish, I know. You go into the British pavilion, or whatever we call it, and there's nothing, and they think that's so funny. Ha 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 ha. There's a free space. I said, for God's sake, that's tax money that's being used for this piece of adolescent nonsense. I think I hope I'll write in the architecture review about it. I think this is throwing away an opportunity. The other thing is all these things with things scribbled on the wall, fake wisdom, the French pavilion, blah, blah, blah. It's like third year schools of architecture throwing their opinions into things on walls. I mean, most of it's absolute rubbish, but most of all biennales are absolute rubbish. I mean, when you take someone like Rem Koolhaas and he talks about fundamentals, it's a bit like asking the devil to talk about heaven, I mean, it's so bloody ridiculous, and it turns out it's bathroom fixtures, and it's such a cynic, that architect, and has no idea about fundamentals at all. So let's take it with a pinch of salt. We come, we have a marvelous time, we all learn something, we're doing this, and it's not bad, and always there's something surprising by a young architect, an old architect, a place you didn't know, and that's great. That's enough for me, quite honestly. I don't want a great big, they don't solve much, Do they mark the stage of architectural culture today? I don't think so, really. But that doesn't stop it being a fantastic thing and doing things like this. Yeah.
Well, I feel totally ashamed of not ever having seen the Sverre Fenn pavilion until today. At the age of nearly 82, it's taken me this time to see it. And to know that he was in there at an age of 40 when he did that, thereabouts, the age of 40, and it's been here for so many years. You can go into that building, and it is as beautiful today to be in that space as it must have been from the outset. It has a beautiful quality of time in it, as you were talking about earlier about time. It has a beautiful quality about refuge, those two walls creating refuge, the solid walls, and the prospect with the glazed walls that are operable, and that amazing light coming through. And the trees inside that building, that they could easily just be 3 trunks and nothing at top. But the light that comes from the shadow of the tree onto the roof, so that the tree is replaced by the shadow, is so beautiful that it keeps making you realize that there's a depth in architecture that has been, and it is not often today. I think that we're doing everything too fast. We're not spending enough time thinking before we do. Fenn, that dear man, has given me a absolutely marvelous appreciation of what architecture can be, the ultimate dignity of the human.
Well, I feel a bit like William. I don't like big events, big meetings, or huge exhibitions either. I rather like conversations and intimate situations. That's when something sincerely happens. Simply, in big exhibitions, the atmosphere is that of competition, and each project disturbs the other one as compared to the experience of going to Ron Shaw, for instance, and approaching before Renzo Piano put his walls there, and finding it there, and it's all the journey is part of that experience, and your preparedness mentally to experience it. So for me, the true experiences in the world of art are take place in silence and solitude. If you have noticed, or probably each one of you have, that when you see a really fine piece of art in a museum, suddenly everything silences. All the people around you disappear, and you are alone in total silence. That's the magic of art. It creates that focus and concentration. That's not possible in a situation like that. But I'm not speaking against Biennale or big exhibitions, but they are not the places to seek real artistic experiences. Of course, they give some kind of a feeling of what is happening in the world of architecture or world of art.
Yeah, I wish that the pavilions and the curators would concentrate on conveying to us what they consider the best work of their nations. That would be good enough for me, without tricks. Of course, you have to have devices, and some of the projection devices are really extraordinary. I've seen some very interesting ways of using gauzes, hanging things, doing, whatever. But it seems to me that to convey this difficult thing, architecture, you have to have many different media, models, projections, drawings, even interviews or what have you. But when you go into so many pavilions where they don't even talk about the recent work that's been going on there, it's mighty strange. Or you go into the Danish pavilion and they present a work by, Rem Koolhaas. They're making propaganda for their new Center of Architecture. Bravo. But I want to know about, the state of Danish architecture, please. At least they have a building there. But there's a lot of, what's going on when in a Biennale there's so little architecture? There's a lot of talk and a lot of this and a lot of that. So, I don't want to be the curator of the thing, but if I were asked, I'd say, your job, please, everybody, is to present the very best work that's going on in your part of the world and give us some idea what it's about. That would be great. And I think that would be more nourishing in the end.
Okay, thank you. Yes. So we are also being in streaming in Barcelona in the COAC. Yeah, they are all together, like very happy. We would like to, if you have any questions for them, so it's an opportunity you shouldn't be missing. No one? I can't believe that. Karma?
No. Sí. Okay. No. So we are so happy to sitting here and hearing all of you. We were really expecting about your works and your conversation. In different ways, we are admiring you for a long time, and it's a nice moment to share. So we want to say thank you a lot for being here, and maybe because all of you, and now also we have white hair, so we have some ages, and I feel so proud on this. So I think it's nice to be older and to have more experience. And I think it would be nice, even maybe young people doesn't care maybe about advertisements and so. and these kind of things. But I think with your perspective, with your life around architecture, if you can say a good advisor to young people, I think it would be nice hearing from you what is the aim you are telling to them.
Did I get it correctly to say some words for young people? Yes. Yeah. It is a very difficult time because the world is racing at such a pace. And as I said earlier, it's expected that within practices, not without exception, but many practices, you're sitting in front of a computer from morning till night. You're staring at a lot of lines. It doesn't have the feeling of a drawing that one is working on. It's quite different. It's a whole new activity. But I think that if the schools of architecture can actually go back a step and be able to get the students up till third year at university to continue thinking and drawing by hand. That should be the name of a title of a book, actually, Johanni. Like the thinking hand. I give it to my students as a requirement for reading. I think that if you don't learn to draw by hand, you're at an enormous disadvantage. There are many students in their fourth and fifth years today, they have no idea how to draw an idea by hand. That is a great problem in my view. Unless you can think three-dimensionally, it's a great problem. Students will say to me, look, I've done it here, it's in plan, it's in section, and I'll throw it up on the screen and show you what it looks like 3D. But I said, draw it for me, just draw it for me. I don't want you to show it to me. They said, I can't draw it for you. Well, I said, how did you think it out? Of course, they're not thinking it out. They're thinking of plan, they're thinking of elevation. It's not the way. I said, unless you can draw it visually before you put it into the computer's a tool. It's not designing it for you. You must think three-dimensionally. You must think about light. You must think about ventilation. You must think about prospect. You must think about refuge. You must think about placemaking. You must think about history. Think about, in our country, Aboriginal history. Think about modern history of farming, for example. These are the sort of things that you've got to go right back to and have an input into the work. And if the universities then decided to say computers are a tool, they come in after third year, this is going to assist you to be able to get things done for you in a reasonable way. By the way, I might tell you, other than repetitive buildings or repetitive levels on a building, I can beat anybody operating on a computer by drawing by hand. So don't forget, the eye-hand thinking is incredibly important. It's a beautiful way of developing ideas. When you draw a line, you're visualizing that space that's being developed. So for the young people, start sketching, start the drawing process. That'll start to give you this three-dimensional thinking, and then that gives you the ability to go on and do architecture that has some sort of depth.
In the plane when I came here, actually to Ljubljana, I read an interview of Francis Ford Coppola, and one of the questions was, what do you say to young filmmakers? What advice do you give them? And he said, my first question would be immediately, do you want to become Spielberg or Jim Jarmusch? This answer reveals how the entire world, including architecture, is being divided into, several fields, like architecture, at least in two fields, architecture as a business. I would say to any student, don't bother. But architecture as a poetic engagement and as a way, a very, how would I say, privileged way of looking at the world and yourself and your friends, architecture provides that position. Then I would say, yes, that's the way to go, but that takes a lot of work. You have to learn history, you have to learn this and that. And I very often tell my students, forget reading architecture books. Read real books, read novels, poetry, look at paintings, because that's the world in which a real student who wants to be engaged in architecture as a poetic engagement has to do, but forget about the business part.
So, I believe in the importance of visual education in general, but much, much earlier than architecture school. 21 years ago, I was invited to the Netherlands to address the Archiprix audience. This is a student award for some very nice work. And they said, would you please talk about, your idea of architectural education? And I said, yes, I will. And I just came in and started talking about the imbalance of modern educational systems towards a sort of functional literacy, not particularly poetic, and a functional numeracy. But what's utterly missing is the ability to think visually as something central to education. And it's in all people, and it's especially in small children. They have an amazing sense of space and even of diagramming, and it's knocked out of them, age 7 or 8, by most of the educational systems that I know. So I think that one needs to go much earlier than architecture school, would make better clients too, where people learn to think three-dimensionally, to draw, to visualize. At the foundation of knowledge is observation, including in science. Years and years ago, I taught at the Carpenter Center for the Visual Arts at Harvard, undergraduates, and I did courses such as Towards an Integrated Theory of Design, which were combining basic concepts around form, process, type, style. They would read things from all periods, but they each had to choose a building and analyze it inside out, the what, the why, the how, including drawings, photographs, plans, and historical thinking. And then they would go on and write about the history of the umbrella or objects or whatever. So I think the professionalization of architecture has narrowed terribly the expectations that are in schools. I think there's a problem here with the European Union. The Bologna Declaration has been a disaster for architecture schools. The Bologna Declaration, because it's cut down 1 year from the Spanish system, it's screwed up the Finnish system. All the ones that were doing a great job have been pushed towards a kind of normalization, which is just rebel against it, throw it out, stupid. It's brought down the quality. One of the good things about Spanish education has been the integration of technique, structure, and form making. But I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about going much earlier and teaching people to see what they see and understand it. Leonardo da Vinci, in his notebooks, talks about experiencia, the experience of things. And he'll spend 2 pages describing a crack in a wall and trying to explain why it is the way it is. And I'm convinced that we're, all of us, much more able to observe things and the mystery of the world than we all think. So my feeling is, and it's very related to drawing, but it's not the only way of looking at things, is that observation, analysis, interiorization, and transformation are at the center of architecture, and drawing is part of that, in my view, although there could be other ways of looking at it. So I'm in favor of, this creates a huge freedom for an individual when they learn to see, learning to see. So that would be my agenda.
Okay, so I think that if there is any other question, we should be finishing for today. It's been such a... There's a question? There is it? We have...
Thank you very much for your reflection. It was very interesting. We have spoke during this cycle a lot about the role of the curator, and it was very interesting. But very often we forget to speak about the person in charge of the museology, the person in charge of translate what the curator want to express in the exhibitions. Or then I would like to know what you think about this role, the role of a museology, because it's really a great challenge, I think, for them.
Yes, well, the role of museums is essential, particularly in our world where there is less and less understanding for what arts are about or what architecture is about. So we need institutions that help the society to somehow see what is around. By the way, that's also what I have suggested to the neuroscientists with whom I have been collaborating, is that probably you will not be able to tell the creative people anything that they wouldn't grasp themselves. It's rather the other way round. But what is really important is to join forces, the scientific argumentation and artistic work, to join forces to open eyes of the society, which is becoming increasingly blind to all the nuances of life and culture. I have, as William said, been museum director and designed probably largest number of exhibitions in Finland than anyone else. I have learned to understand that exhibitions are halfway between theater and literary communication. If that theatrical, emotive, atmospheric element is missing, as in surprisingly many of the exhibitions today at the Biennale, the exhibition fails. There has to be a message that hits you right away when you enter. If that isn't there, you don't have any encouragement to look at the minute details. So I would suggest to the exhibition designers to have a little bit more interest in how artistic works are displayed, and all of that actually brings us back to what we started out with. Exhibition design is naturally an architectural and artistic task, in addition to being curatorial in its historical, intellectual sense.
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, a good exhibition is an architectural promenade, and it's also a response to the given building or place. I, have not been involved to the extent that Ioanni has, but I actually designed some of my own exhibitions, including one of painting and drawing and photography in the Palace of Charles V in the Alhambra. We have a very strong site. There are axes, there's geometry, there's light, and there's the larger context. But I think that there have been some very, very successful architectural exhibitions. For example, the museum at Louisiana, north of Copenhagen, has had an exemplary series of exhibitions that communicating contemporary or other architecture. That's Kjeld Kjærsen, who's the chief curator. They did a brilliant exhibition about Jørn Utzon 8 years ago. It's the best monographic exhibition I've ever seen. and it brought nearly 1 million visitors in 8 months. Imagine. Of course, it's in a wonderful setting. It's the beautiful museum designed in the late 50s by Jürgen Boe, etc., looking towards Sweden. It's a place where people like to go to enjoy a meal. They have concerts. It's a cultural center, if you like, a garden. All of that is true. But they put into there a sequence of events using models, using videos, using drawings, reconstructions that conveyed very powerfully what Utzon was about, including his understanding of Mesoamerica, of Montalban and platforms. So almost anybody going through there got some pretty good general idea of what Utzon was about. But they used many media and was very skillful the way the juxtapositions work. So, you know, here and there have been wonderful shows. And I'm thinking of a very different style of show, which was organized initially at MoMA, which was on Labruste, Henri Labruste, which was organized by Barry Bergdahl. And again, it was a lovely mixture of watercolors, of books, of actual models, of construction, of many levels to the work of three-dimensionality. You must have a sense of a series of punctuations in 3D, and I think you must have moving images. Today, people are so used to moving images, you should put them in. I mean, it brings it alive. Just sticking some photos on the wall is not good enough. But if you have stills and you have things, then you have a very rich mixture. And so one could go on and on. But it depends on the seriousness of the curator. And the curator is a person, we hope, with a culture of architecture and a sense of history and all the other things. What I'm not comfortable with is when curators take it upon themselves to pretend to be pointing the way for the future of architecture. Now, have you heard that recently in this room? I did. I thought, no, this is no good at all. How can you arrogate to yourself that function? That is the function of architects, to create buildings. In the same way, critics who imagine that they can chart the future, this is absolute nonsense, you know. The job of architects is to make the buildings which express our time. And the curator or the critic or whatever are commenting on the existing, maybe suggesting a future. But when it turns into curators in a kind of pseudo-avant-garde mode, using giant sums of public money to say architecture should be this, architecture should be that, I call that cultural engineering. I don't like the smell at all when that starts.
Okay. Johanni and I think you joined us in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. You were on the jury then, weren't you, when we went to St.
No, I wasn't.
You weren't, okay. One of the great experiences for me was to be in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, and it was the 8 or 9 members of the jury, Tom and Margot Pritzker, and a few other people. And Tom had been able to organize with the director of the museum to open up the rooms that the public have never seen. And one of the most exciting experiences of my life was a beautiful number of impressionist paintings, probably stolen, sitting up against the walls, not hung at all. There was no curator involved, but the quality of the work was so amazing that it's probably one of the most exciting exhibitions I've ever been to. So what I'm suggesting is the quality of the work, if it is so good, then it doesn't need a lot of curatorial massaging.
So now, yes, it's our time. We're running out of time. I'm just receiving messages all the time, like stop. Thank you very much for being here, for joining us to with the family of RCR, your magnificent words, and everything is so inspiring. I am personally super honored of being able to be with you in this occasion, and very welcome to Venice, and once again, thank you very much. Now, I'm not sure if we're having a short rest, or because we are going to have the final session of the new formats Dream and Nature program, that it's going to be RCR talking with William Curtis and in Spanish. So we'll meet you here in about a quarter or so. Thank you very much.